Tuesday, July 3rd, 30th, 2002. Regional Military Naval Affairs Headquarters located in New York. The interviewer is Michael Russert. Could you give me your name, date, and place of birth, please?
My name is William P. Langevoort. My date of birth is August the 11th, 1925. And what else?
Where were you born, sir?
I was born in Clifton, New Jersey.
Okay, thank you very much. What was your pre-war education?
I had just graduated from high school, but I enlisted in the Army Air Corps at the time, it was called.
How old were you when you enlisted?
I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
And of course I couldn't go in until I was 18, and my mother wouldn't sign for me until I took a 36-month deferment, which pushed it into 44. January 44 is when I went in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Could you tell me what you remember about Pearl Harbor? When did you hear about this, and what was your reaction to it?
Well, I know where I was, in an ice skating rink, indoor ice skating rink. We had practice up in Pearl River, in this Riverdale, as they called it, and I was just startled, everybody was. I think everybody just got off the ice and just started talking about, my gosh, what are we going to do? Our lives are going to change. Mm-hmm. And so that was what happened in 41. But I was still in high school, and most of the boys, especially, looked forward to some of the different opportunities there were for education in the Navy. They had a V2 program. The Army had a A10 program. I don't know. They had different names and numbers for them. And they were all, you might say, pre-officer types of that they would get them into. And my school records were never that great. So I had no opportunity other than to get into the Air Corps, and hopefully I wanted to be a pilot, in as much as my folks were not very affluent. They couldn't afford to send me to college. So this was a way of getting an education in pilot training that I could use after the war as a commercial pilot. But that never happened either.
Where did you go for your basic training?
Basic training, well, as they first entered you in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and that was just for a few weeks. And then they sent me to the worst place that they could, which was down in Biloxi, Mississippi. And Walter Winchell made a remark that if you had a son in Guadalcanal, pray for him. If you have a son down in Biloxi, Mississippi, there's no use of praying. Walter Winchell was quite a character on the radio at that time.
Could you explain some of your experiences? You told me something about some of your experiences there earlier with your officer, your drill instructor, was it?
Oh yes, this was down at that field. He was a redneck Southerner, and he didn't like Yankees at all. And he used to call it Yankee this and Yankee that, and that really irritated me no end, because I didn't feel as though I was a Yankee. I came from northern states, but by the same token, my parents were both from European heritage, and I felt I was an American, not a Yankee.
Okay, where did you go? What kind of training did you receive in Mississippi?
Just the basic military training. I was very fortunate. I caught KP 2 or 3 times, but I was lucky enough to get the KP where you sent to the bakery and we sliced bread with a machine. So we had it easy.
Where did you go after that for training?
After that training, we didn't know where we were going to wind up, but several of us, mainly 4 guys together, or turned out to be 3 fellows together, Jordan, Kiesel, and Langevoort, J, K, and L. We were through everything together, and we went on to gunnery school in Tyndall Field, Florida, at which time we were waiting for a central fire control unit, which was never formed, and finally they put us into the regular gunnery, and we graduated from that. I was asked if I wanted to become an instructor, and at that time, you were wild and woolly, you know, and you said, nah, I want to get to combat, foolishly. But anyhow, they put us on a troop train up north again. We came up to an RTU training, that's a replacement training unit, in Westover Field over here in Chicopee, Mass. So that's where we met our full crew then of 10 men, and this is where we had our training, flying, bombing, trial bombers, whatever. And we were there for several months. And then it was a case that we were ready, and the pilot came to me and says, well, Bill, we're going home now for a 30-day, or I guess it was a 15-day. You can tell your mother we're going to England. I said, how do you know? He says, well, my father is a brigadier general, and my uncle's a brigadier general. He says, and my father wanted me to go down to the South Pacific to be with him. And he says, I had my uncle cut orders to go to Europe, so we're going to England.
What kind of planes did you train on?
Pardon?
What kind of planes did you use for training?
They were brand new B-24 Liberators, and they had, see, I was, on my first crew, I was a tail gunner, and the tail gun turret was the same as a nose gun turret. The Martin upper was a little different, but basically those were the 3 turrets that were on the ship. There were those that trained in the ball turret. However, in Europe, they took the ball out, and they didn't fly any missions with the ball in. Why? Because they had to be cranked down into position. And if a plane got hit, it was going down, and quickly, especially at B-24. There wasn't time enough to crank that fella up, so he usually went down with the ship. But so by the time we got over there, there was no ball gunner. But they used the ball gunner for other purposes, such as he was a chaff man. Now, what is chaff? Chaff is a metal tinfoil that they would send out and blanket the air so that it would foul up the German radar. And we'd pass that if we heard a lot of flak coming closer, push a lot more out. But so anyway, we went over by boat. Took us 9 days. We went alone. We're on a big Mauritania, that was one of the Cunard's fastest ships at one time, until the Queen Mary's and the Queen Elizabeth's came along. But we got over there in 9 days, unescorted. We didn't see a naval ship until we saw the Irish coast. We docked in Liverpool, and then we went to a pool called Stone, and from there is where they replaced the any of the planes that had to be replaced by attrition or whatever happened. So we were on the troop train. They put the troop train aside for a couple hours, and we finally found out that we were going to Tibbetham, all of us, mainly because they had lost 30 planes in one day. They had gone to an aircraft factory, and they got hit by 200 Messerschmitts and Me-109s. So they were able to put up 10 ships the next day. They went right back there. But that's determination that they had. So we were then at the base at Tibbetham, and we all had to be checked out on the latest things that were available. And the pilot and the skeleton crew, which was a co-pilot, navigator, radio operator, engineer, that's the skeleton crew, were elected to take an old bomber over to Ireland and leave it there for junking. And 2 other planes also, so there was a complement of 3, plus they sent a 4th plane to bring them all back. And so I asked the pilot if I could go to Ireland, because I wanted to pick up some Irish linen for my mother. And he says, well, I don't know. He says, I'm not in charge of the group. He says, but I'll find out for you. So next day he come by and he says, no, Bill, I can't take you. There's going to be too many fellas there in the plane coming back. So we don't know exactly what happened, but plane blew up. 24 fellas were killed in one full swoop. And so that was 5 of my crew. Well, we went to Cambridge, England, where we had a funeral for them in a beautiful cemetery with many, many white crosses. And that evening, they bussed us back to the base, and we were tired from everything that happened that day. And I went to bed, and about 3 o'clock in the morning, I get somebody at my shoulder and says, hey, you Langevoort? Yeah. Well, you're flying, get up. I'm flying? I don't even have a crew. You're flying, you're on the roll call. Get up, get some breakfast, and report over to the briefing room. Okay, so I did, and I was told I was on a new crew. They had a man that had been the ball gunner that was now being trained for radar, and so he was transferred out, and I became what they called a armor gunner. Now the armor gunner replaced a bombardier. Wherever you had a wingman, the wing plane toggled out the bombs by radio from the lead plane. So they didn't need a bombardier. But as an armor gunner, my job going across the channel was to remove the pins from the bombs to make them available to their propellers spinning and arming them as they went down. So that was my job. And one trip we we had one of the original consolidated B-24s, but some of them were made by Ford in Willow Run, and they were not as good as some of the older planes. The plane that we had flown was a plane called Win with Page. It was a man's name, two men name. It was a pilot with a crew chief, so both of their names were on the plane. But we renamed it to Wolfpack, and that's what we flew for most of our missions.
Did you paint any nose art?
Me?
Was there nose art on the plane?
Yes.
What did you have as your decoration?
A wolf.
A wolf, okay.
Yeah. Picture of wolf.
How about, did you have a jacket?
Yes.
You had the decoration on that too?
No. Some of them did. I didn't want to have anything painted on it. My oldest grandson has my jacket today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's quite an experience. So one day, we couldn't all get up as high as we wanted to get above the clouds, so they had a recall. So I had to go back in and put the pins back in the bombs, in the bomb bay. So there was, a certain amount of work to it. One of the missions that I alluded to was the mission to Rhineland, France. And this is the first time that napalm was dropped. And they had warned the Germans that they wanted them to give up. It was just a pocket of resistance at the mouth of the river that led down to Bordeaux. And the Americans wanted to use the Bordeaux as a point closest to the shipping points in the United States. So they warned them, said that they were going to come in and annihilate them. They didn't believe it. So the first day they went in, they knocked out all the anti-aircraft guns and to give us clear sailing. Second day I was on that mission. We had napalm. Now the napalm was filled into wing tanks of P-51s, and they had a detonating charge, a hand grenade. It was a real, what do they call it? Makeshift Rube Goldberg setup. And so we went on a bomb run. We dropped, but only 3 of the 4 dropped. One came off the shackle at one end, but not at the other. So it was actually pointing its front toward the ceiling of the bomb bay, and the back end of it was hanging out. So the bomb bay's doors couldn't be shut. We couldn't land with it. So it was a case of getting the bomb out or bailing out. And so the engineer came from the front and I came from the back, and we finally pried that damn thing loose. And we watched it fall from about 10,000 feet and hit the Atlantic Ocean, and flames right on top of the ocean. And then, of course, we could drop, we could close the bomb bay doors, and we flew back to England all alone because the rest of the group had already, by the time we spent fiddling around getting that damn thing out. So that was one of the most harrowing experiences we had. I also have a piece of flak that I picked up from the waist of the plane. It had knocked out our oxygen in one position, and this is a piece of the flak, not very large, but they can do a lot of damage. And some of the pieces of flak are larger, whatever. It's what we call flak, an artilleryman on the ground calls shrapnel. Very jagged, very, but you can see the machining on the inside of the shell. And it was still red hot when I picked it up, so I was holding it in my hand, and I said to over the interphone, I got a piece of flak in my hand. What? I told you guys I didn't want any Purple Hearts. So that was the pilot. And I said, no, I'm holding it in my hand. So he wanted it. When I got back, I said, nope, that's mine. So that's some of our experience. We came back on one engine one time. The day we came back, where we had to put the pins back in, one of the planes landed and the bomb came down through the bomb bay doors and rolled alongside the runway. It had been properly wired so it couldn't go off, but it could have. You know, my second pilot was a fellow who was only 5'4". How he ever got into bombers, I don't know. But anyway, in contrast to my first pilot, that was 6 foot something. But anyway, he used to stand up at the controls when he brought the plane in after a bomb run, come in to land back at the base. And it was a case of bouncing it in at times, you know. That day he brought it in just as beautifully smooth as silk. So these are some of the things that you remember. I've seen B-24s get hit, both wings torn off, tumble end over end. And of course, so you're watching this and you're saying, get out, to the guys that are still in the plane. And sometimes you'd count. And sometimes the count was set 10, but sometimes not. And but it's interesting, in this book on the 445th, there is a dot in front of the names of any of the men who were missing in action. A lot of them turned up later on from prison camps and whatnot, but a lot of them passed on. I had one of the fellows I mentioned was Jordan Kiesel in Langevoort. Jordan got shot down, and he was a prisoner of war for a while. All 10 of his buddies parachuted out for the first time, and most they got out of it was one of the fellows had a broken ankle, but they all got back to England, got in the hospital for a month, and came back to the States. I celebrated VJ Day with Jordan in New Jersey.
How many missions did you fly?
35. 35, and then one recall, so that didn't count. But yeah, you had what they call flak leave after you had gotten up into the late 20s. They would take all your military uniforms away from you and give you civilian clothes, and they'd send you up north to the lake areas and give you a week of rest and recuperation between flights. And this was the summer home of the owner of the Canard Lines, and it was a beautiful place. And we were able to take our bicycles and go down into town and play darts with the British. And that's where you really learned what the British were all about. Really strong people, very strong people. They had to, you talk about the Battle of Britain, the 8th Air Force and 9th Air Force came over and did a job, but they did one hell of a job before we even got there. So I know that we were on one mission, was New Year's Eve. We couldn't get up most of the month of December because of bad weather. And of course that was at the time of Battle of the Bulge. And we plus all of the Canadian Air Force, plus all of the RAF who usually flew at night, all of the 8th, all of the 9th, medium bombers, everything. 7,000 planes in the air at one time, all daylight. It was so black with planes in the air, you had to watch where you test fired your guns. So that's about most of what I have went through. We came back on one engine one day. We had to start throwing things out because when you start losing one engine on a 24, you start losing altitude. But we got home fine. We had one man get his feet frozen, and we came back shooting flares. They allowed us to break formation over the channel, and we got him home, and he was fine after they thawed him out. But that's about our experiences. We had some milk runs where we didn't see any flak or fighters, and we saw times when we had really our hands full with the fighters. We got hit by Me-262s. That was the first operational jet that was in any war, and it was fast, it had heavy armament, and they would dart in and out of the formations, and they'd knock down a plane before you could say boo. That is basically my story. If you've got any questions, I'll be glad to.
Well, how do you think your service changed your life or affected your life?
It made me feel as though I was a survivor. And I have been a survivor ever since. The GI Bill allowed me to go to school. I made the wrong choice in going to schools. I went out to the Missouri School of Mines. I didn't have the proper high school education to take an engineering school. I didn't have chemistry as an example. I did have some of the other. I was also very poor in math, so calculus threw me a curve. I didn't have anything like that. So that I then came back and I went to school at night. I got a job, and from then I proceeded different things. But I feel as though I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of cancer. I'm a survivor of a automobile crash where my wife was killed. We hit black ice on the New York Thruway and went through a guardrail down 112 feet, and she was thrown out of the vehicle and pinned underneath it. She died the same night. So I'm a survivor of that. She had her chest caved in, her pelvis caved in, multiple breaks on her arms and legs. She'd lived, she'd have been a cripple, and she never would have wanted to live that way. But she left me with 4 good children and 8 good grandchildren. So I've got a lot to live for, and I look at every life as a challenge. Everybody has a challenge.
Do you belong to any veterans groups?
I had attended the VFW, but there it's a case of finding an excuse to get out of the house to tip a few. And who needs that?
Has your unit ever had any reunions?
No, but just recently, like 2 months ago, I met my pilot, the second pilot, in Chicago. And his wife had passed on since I did see him several weeks before that crash took place where I lost my wife. And he has since lost his wife, so he's now in his 80s, and he has a girlfriend, very nice lady, and she had a grandchild that was graduating too, and originally from that area, but they had driven up from Arkansas, and I'm supposed to be going out there this fall sometime to see him again. We only had a day together.
Whereabouts were you when the war ended in Europe?
That's a good question. I was in quarantine. I couldn't get out to celebrate. We were being quarantined for a few days before they shipped us up to Scotland to pick up the boat back to the States. Came back on the Ile-de-France, which was also a big liner. And I came back on with a bombardier from another crew who lives here in Colony, who I flew a lot of missions with. In fact, he was in one of the lead planes. So I kept, and he became commander of the VFW here. He's now the chaplain. But so I see him once in a while.
Now, you've got some memorabilia there.
Yeah,
you want to show us?
This is a belt buckle from German officer, I assume. The interesting part about it is that across the top of it, it says in German, Gott mit uns, which means God is with us. Isn't it ironic? And that was brought back by the engineer who went on trolley missions. And trolley missions were those that were, the skeleton crew would load up the plane with mechanics, bakers, everybody on that were not flying personnel. They'd fly them over to Holland, and then because there was no decent airfields left in Germany, they would bus them to a lot of these towns that had been blasted to see what destruction had. It was just something they did for a month or so.
Were you ever aware of any of the concentration camps and their existence?
Toward the end, very little. They had kept that pretty quiet, and especially to the troops. But yeah, it's sad, very sad. I have here some other. These are actual pins from some of the first missions that I went on that I pulled from the bombs. One for each mission to start with. But then you get tired after a while and you don't do it anymore.
You dated them as to what mission it was?
Yeah, that's all on there. This is the 9th mission. So,
Huh, that's pretty interesting. I've
Yeah.
never seen one of those before.
Huh? Never seen one of those.
No.
Just a cotter pen.
And this is a collar pin from German. Can't see, I don't know if you can. It's black to begin with.
Okay, got it.
And because I was sort of a bombardier, sort of an armorer man, I used to wear crew wings as opposed to gunner's wings or bombardier's wings or pilot's wings or anything like that. So that's what and I was also credited with being in 3 battle stars on my ETO ribbon and a silver oak leaf cluster which denoted 5 additional air medals to the air medal.
Okay.
And this was, my rank was staff sergeant.
Got it.
And this was, of course, the 8th Air Force patch.
Okay.
Now this is an interesting thing. It's a silk glove. This is government issue. What we used to wear under our heated gloves. And the reason for this was that if we had to work on our guns at all, it was so cold at times that if you took your heated glove off, your skin would stick right to the gun. So this was an intermediate, and we could handle the guns and we could work on them with this glove.
Interesting.
Do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, other than I'm glad I'm here. I often feel, you know, a loss yet of some of the men that I was with. They had such promising futures, and they had to give their lives. I feel that anybody that was over in the South Pacific, or whether they were in Europe, or whether they were in Africa, or wherever they might have had to be, gave whatever they had to in order to win the war. And sometimes some people didn't think very much of their job. As an example, I had a friend of mine from Clifton, New Jersey, that we enlisted in the Air Force together. But he was a little older than I, maybe 6 months or so. So he went in right away. And he did get a navigator's commission. And he flew in B-24s too. But his assignment was to fly up and down the English Channel. And they had their B-24 loaded with radar jamming equipment. So he never saw a German fighter, he never saw flak, he never saw a lot of these things. But he got air medals. And why shouldn't he have?
Sure.
Why shouldn't he? He was contributing. I know darn well that, yeah, it would be expensive for the Germans when they had so many other 24s and 17s that they could shoot up, than to send 200 of them, let's say, out to get one radar plane and find him first, you know. So, no, I don't agree with his statement that he didn't feel as though he was entitled to an air medal or any of the things that were given to the rest of us that had flown. It was a combined effort. When my pilot finally came back, the second pilot, he was asked by the crew chief, who never flew, whether he would fly his plane back to the States. He said, sure. So he loaded him up, brought him back. Plane was at the right field for a while because it had over 100 missions on it. and very few 24s had 100 missions on it. But a lot of feeling, a lot of... I had the one boy, of course I call them all boys because we were at that time. The radio operator was from New Jersey as well. And he was the only son, the only child this couple had.
Okay, we're going to stop. The tape ran out.
Okay.
Okay.
This is one of the pins that I removed from a bomb that has not yet dropped from the plane. This is always in the bomb when they're loading it, when they're getting it ready. But then they put this bomb on a shackle inside the bomb bay. But they have another wire that's also through the propeller that is fastened onto the side of the bomb bay. And as the bomb drops away, that last pin is pulled automatically. So then the propeller starts spinning, and then it gets down to a phase where it is now totally armed. So you've got fail-safes, and you have to abide by them or you have trouble. Yeah. But I collected them for about my first 12 or so missions, and then I got tired of doing that. And then they wanted all of them turned in. They had all kinds of Mickey Mouse regulations as time went on. But as I say, this fella that I was talking about, he was John Arigati. He was the radio operator, and he came one time we were in training over Westover, and he came back to, I was sitting in my turret, and I usually kept the doors open, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said to me, "Oh, I come back just to find out what you do back here." So I showed him, and he says, God forbid that anything might happen. He says, but I might have to replace you if anything did happen. I said, I understand. Yeah. But he was a real gentleman. And he introduced me to his mother and father before we left to go to England. And so I did know them. And of course he was killed, one of the 24 that were killed in that original crash. And his mother and father wrote to me to find out exactly what happened or what I knew had happened. And I gave them a letter of what I thought was the reason. I feel that somebody was transferring fuel as they came across the Irish Sea, and in case of somebody else was smoking, and the plane just became a bomb in itself. But anyway, his mother and father sent me all the Christmas packages, Christmas of '44, that were destined for him. And after I came back, I went to see them. Then they brought his body back from England and reburied it in New Jersey. Lived on the Palisades. And so after the funeral, I had to go and meet all of his aunts and uncles and the whole bit. I got a Christmas card from his mother and father until they both passed away. Very nice. Very Just like it's, it's family when you get to know somebody. And it still bothers me today. I think they all had such beautiful futures, but that's war. And that's why we don't need it. I know you can't talk to some people, some leaders, but we have to try. So if you have any other questions that you might
Thank you very much. It was a great interview. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, sure.
Story.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart was in our group and flew his missions from our group, but then he was, by the time I had joined the group, he had moved on to wing headquarters and became a specialist up there in wing headquarters. Jimmy had started off, and this is out of this book here, a book that I picked up for a quarter at the Sanford Library, local. Mm-hmm. And here are some of the comments that are in the book that are pertinent. He said he became a private in the Army Air Corps on March 22nd, 1941. He accepted for a year of military training. This was more than 8 months before the bombings of Pearl Harbor. So he wasn't just a movie star looking for attention. From another page, his pay as a private was only a few dollars a week, something of a drop from his Hollywood salary, then many thousands a week. Stewart served as an instructor for Flying Fortresses, which was the B-17 pilots, and was promoted to the rank of captain on July 4th, 1943. In November of that year, he flew a B-24 Liberator from Florida to Brazil, and then received orders to head for West Africa and then Europe. He landed in at the Norfolk village of Tibbetham on November 25th. It became his home and that of the 445th Bomb Group. Stewart skippered a 24 Liberator in 20 combat missions, some of them in daylight. He took part in spectacular raids on Bremen in December of 43 and on Berlin in 1944. He was advanced to a major. He won the Air Medal, Oak Leaf Cluster, and for his leadership of the 703 Squadron of Bombers during February 20th, 1944, raid on aircraft factories in Brunswick in Germany, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. And he was asked about commanding a bomber wing. He was promoted to colonel before his release for active duty in the autumn of 45 as the Chief of Staff of the 2nd Combat Wing, 8th Air Force. He was asked about his decorations and his total 1,800 flying hours. He says, I had a lot of close calls. The whole war was a close call. But I was doing my duty. That's Jimmy Stewart. I saw him one morning. In fact, it was the morning that we went to Rhineland, France with the napalm. He was about as far as I am to you now, away from him. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning at briefing. And you got to remember that I was 19 when I was flying this mission, and he was 35. He looked like an old man. He had not shaven. He had flown down from the 389th, that's the wing headquarters, to our field. But everybody looked at him as an ordinary guy. just as he has said, I had a job to do. And that's the way a lot of people remember him. And as far as being a movie star, he was quite a movie star before, and he was quite a movie star afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But he lived a normal life. He had a wonderful wife, family, and that's what we all enjoyed.
Could you explain about that photograph over there, please?
Yeah, sure. This photograph is a one that was taken of a couple of, couple of members of my crew. One man is passed away from normal attrition, and one of them has the 8th Air Force on his leather jacket, and the other one has a picture of the wolf pack.
Okay, got it.
This man became a president of a bank. This man I see every February when I go down to my brother's house in Florida. He's still alive. He's enjoying life.
Why don't you tell us about this photograph?
This is a picture of myself and my brother taken in Springfield, Mass. At the time, my brother had just gotten married.
Which one is your brother?
The brother is the smaller guy.
Oh, okay.
He's the officer. He was drafted out of Wright Aeronautical. He was building engines in Paterson, New Jersey. He had been deferred, and finally he was drafted. They sent him in one school after another, and at this time he has an officer's uniform on. He graduated from Yale University with the government, and he was a bomb site engineer, and he was being sent over after I came back from overseas to Guam. He was a follow-up for the atomic bomb.
Hmm. About that one?
This is a picture of me at one of the other bases in my dress uniform, which was OD or olive drab at the time. They didn't have the beautiful blue that they have today.
Now, what is that building behind there, that Quonset hut?
That's a Quonset hut. That's just where.
Is that a briefing room or something?
No, that was just where a friend of mine from high school was living, and we took the picture there at that field. I have seen several men in. These are actual bomb drops. Both of them, on 2 different missions that I took with my own camera.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Okay, I guess that would be it. We could copy some of these then. All right, thank you.